Good afternoon and welcome everyone. I would like to begin this webinar by acknowledging that although we are meeting virtually today, the land on which I and representatives of the Canadian Construction Association gather is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The Algonquin peoples have lived on this land since time immemorial. I acknowledge that many others may be on different territory, but I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be present here today. Thank you all for joining us. With me today, our panelists are Stephen Callender, President, the Afro-Canadian Contractors Association, Tim Larond, National Director, Indigenous Strategies for Chandos Construction, Lisa Stevens, Chief Strategy Officer for British Columbia Construction Association, and Karen Walsh, Executive Director and Project Consultant for the Office to Advance Women Apprentices. And I am Nicole Chabot, Vice President of El Chabot Enterprises. As part of CCA's Construction Day celebration, today's webinar speaks to the importance of diversity and inclusion in the workplace, the work that has been done, and the work that we still have left to do. I'm so pleased to be moderating today's session on such a meaningful topic. I know for us at Chabot Enterprises, being a fully Indigenous-owned Manitoba heavy civil company, diversity has come to our ranks pretty organically over the last decade, and we've been fortunate in that regard. Our growth has obliged robust hiring strategies, which saw us recruiting as many qualified applicants as we could find at times, and many from underrepresented groups. Preparing for this session, I've reflected that I myself am an example of diversity and inclusion in my industry. I'm a part of a third generation working in my family business, which happens to be in construction. And that's always the way that I've seen it. I've been fortunate in my experience thus far. The positive has outweighed the negative, to the credit of my company founders and to those who have guided me in my career. It never occurred to me that I didn't belong somewhere or couldn't be part of something because I am a woman or because I am Indigenous. And because that sense of connection is still exceptional, I'm driven to do what I can to support inclusivity, remove barriers, and promote acceptance and diversity in our industry. And the more I learn and experience, I believe diversity and inclusion is key to the future success of our industry. A really interesting part in preparing for this session was the discussion surrounding the use of diversity and inclusion as interchangeable terms. The belief that having a diverse and inclusive workplace is mutually assumed. And that idea has really stuck with me, and it got me reevaluating what I think I know. And because of that, I'm looking forward to this session today and hearing our subject matter experts further expand on this and other concepts. And with that thought in mind, I'd like to pose our first question to Tim Larond. Tim, diversity and inclusivity is very broad. What are some challenges organizations face in promising a diverse and inclusive culture and the reality of the variety of experiences that individuals may have? How does Chandos address this?
Thanks, Nicole and Miigwech, for including the land acknowledgement, which recognizes and acknowledges the Indigenous people, who are really the original caretakers of this land. So I'd just like to start off by saying that, as you mentioned, Nicole, diversity and inclusion are two different words and two different meanings. And some organizations believe the two words are interchangeable and mean the same thing. So I'd like to kind of further that point and just point out a couple of differences. Diversity really focuses on the makeup of a workforce, while inclusion is a measure of corporate culture that enables diversity to thrive. I once heard an analogy to a diversity and inclusion. Diversity is going to the dance, while inclusion is asking someone to dance. So in many cases, as you pointed out, corporations may have a diversity policy, but they may not have an inclusive environment, which allows the diversity policy to thrive. So for an individual who may be from a diverse background, the challenge of working for an organization that does not have an inclusive policy is that they will quickly realize there are people within the organization that do not look like them or represent their values. This may be a challenge for many organizations as the Canadian population is becoming more diverse. And the challenge for many corporations is to develop a workforce that represents the Canadian population and the clients and the communities that we all serve. To solve this issue, there needs to be strong leadership in the corporation that enforces these values. And the diversity and inclusion policy needs to be embedded in the values of the corporation. So at Chandos, we are a certified B corporation, and we have the following values: inclusion, which means we all belong; collaboration, which means we learn from each other; ingenious, which means we see things differently; and innovative, we have the courage to act. We believe the best team is a diverse team, and there is data that supports this concept. So in 2019, Korn Ferry, which is a global organizational consulting firm, did some research and compared a diverse team to a homogenous team. And some of the results were quite interesting. Over time, the diverse team was more productive than the homogenous team. Team performance improves with a diverse team. There was higher innovation with a diverse team, which resulted in 19% more revenue from innovation, up to 30% greater ability to spot and reduce business risks, which resulted in 25 to 35% measure of more likely to outperform on profitability. This also leads to higher employee satisfaction and retention in a diverse corporation. So with this information, Chandos is working towards employment equity by ensuring our recruiting must increase in diversity in our candidate pools, with the goal of being the employer of choice for diverse candidates. So this includes a focus on other organizations and industries other than construction. So we have adopted diversity and inclusion as a KPI for our leaders who are responsible for most of the hiring by ensuring that we have basically a flexible work hours that with prearranged with team leaders. We have developed incentives for managers to recognize and adjust unconscious bias. And we're developing infinity groups. One of the parts of my Indigenous strategy is to look for like-minded individuals in the organization who want to learn more about the Indigenous culture. So we will focus on finding more established construction professionals that are also diverse candidates. This means that diversity and inclusion policy at Chandos is not really out there, but as an add-on to our recruitment strategy, diversity and inclusion is at the center of our talent strategy, which incentivizes hiring managers to build a talent pipeline of diverse candidates. We recognize there's a big difference between equality and equity. Equality means sameness and promotes fairness and justice by giving everyone the same thing, but it can only work if everyone starts from the same place. Equity, on the other hand, means fairness, and equity is about making sure people get access to the same opportunities. Sometimes our differences in history can create barriers to participation. So we must first ensure equity before we can ensure equality. So these are just some of the things that we're doing at Chandos, Nicole, to really make sure that diversity and inclusion is a priority in not only our day-to-day operations, but in our hiring practices as we grow the corporation.
Fantastic. Tim, the toolkit that you're talking about that Chandos is putting together, I mean, that's really impressive. And I love the focus on equity, and the way that you've defined it really speaks to me. I know as an employer in my business, I want everyone to feel that they're welcomed, accepted, and valued. And, you know, unfortunately, sometimes reality falls short. People are people, and we fail to execute well. And I think the best thing for all of us, I know for myself, is to keep learning. We have to learn how to do it better. And certainly the tools that you're talking about developing at Chandos are important. They're important for industry. Sharing that knowledge and information with our workforce, building a more accepting and empathetic environment, and of course, you know, making space for difficult conversations. I think how we handle the situations, and especially from the top down, like you mentioned, really shows our workforce that we're taking that commitment seriously to build respectful, diverse, and inclusive workplaces for everyone. Thank you for that. That does lead me into my next question, which I'd like to pose to Stephen Callender. Stephen, can you tell us, have you personally encountered or observed racism or discrimination in the workplace? How have you addressed it? And have you changed how you've addressed it over time?
Yes, definitely. Two stories. When I was an apprentice, there was a meeting after work, and one of my journeyman sort of me being the only Black person in the groups, start to explain that he does have some Black friends also. And the way he said it was a bit condescending. And one of the other journeymen who knew him well looked at him and says, "Jimmy, you're a bloody racist." He said, "No, I'm not. No, I'm not." So the guy who confronted him asked him, "Okay, Jimmy, if your daughter brought home a Black guy as a boyfriend, what would you do?" All of a sudden, he started stuttering. You couldn't answer the question. Totally, it was shocking to me, but it really proved a point. You don't know who you're sitting with sometimes. And fast forward, many years later, 8 years later, I am the general foreman for Curtin Wall Company. I'm sitting in a foreman's meeting, and a new superintendent walks in, and he was complaining about things on the site that he found when he came here, and he's talking about certain things were wrong, and he looks and says, "And there's a Black man running the Curtin Wall Company." And it was said in a joking way, but to him it was a joke, but it was a bit funny to everyone else. And I felt, you feel that, not anger, but just disappointment. And you play it off. And so the way I handled it at that time was to ignore it. Usually do what I had to do to prove that I can be just as good as anyone else. So to a certain extent, I don't look to prove anything. I just do what I have to do, go ahead in life. If my aim is to do something, just do it. And in that way, if it came forward, even in forming Acca, it's something that has to be done. And our policy is to just do it and get it done and just keep on moving forward. And people will realize that we're all people, and we're just here to live a life, work together, and get things done in life. If it's personal or business-wise, it's about getting it done.
No, wonderful. I couldn't agree more. I mean, in construction, it's all about building a team and being part of that team. And I totally understand what you're saying about, feeling singled out, and sometimes how do you fit yourself back into that mold? And sometimes it's having to work to prove yourself where you shouldn't have to. And I mean, it's disappointing that these stories are still ongoing today. I know I had the opportunity to watch the video that was shared that we'll talk about later with Karen, and hearing some of the dialogue in there. It's frustrating that we still have all of these barriers to break down, and the biases, and the work's underway, right? And I think our next question will hopefully lead us in the direction for solutions on that. My next question I'm going to pose to Lisa Stevens, and we know that there are a patchwork of programs across Canada to help underrepresented groups be exposed to the industry. Lisa, how do you determine what programs are effective and what kinds of KPIs we should be looking at?
Well, it's a really good and important question. I think the metrics that are going to be important will depend on the individual and what your goals are. But I think a good rule of thumb generally is to look at outcome metrics rather than process metrics. And so even in this question, the word exposure really stands out for me, because exposure isn't necessarily an outcome. Exposure is a process or an experience. And exposure to something doesn't necessarily yield a result. So as an employer or an employee, for me, the outcomes that matter the most are people actually getting jobs and then staying in those jobs and succeeding in them along a career path through apprenticeship and apprenticeship completion. Now, even saying that, we have to recognize that our industry is 95% male, and it's extremely important when we're talking about workforce development to expose non-traditional talent to our industry. But what I would be looking for is what those exposure programs actually lead to. Sometimes there are programs that promise foundation training for in-demand jobs, but they don't actually have a connection to employment opportunities. And that can be a very frustrating experience for students who feel misled or even cheated. And so one of the things, people always struggle to understand as well in our industry, which is very important when we're looking at programs, is that in order to be an apprentice, you have to have a job first. So getting that job is really the first milestone, not the second one. And finding a program that puts people into jobs and can prove that connection to industry, for me, is really important when looking for success. And then, as I already said, retention. You know, an exception to that might be programs that are looking to introduce young people into the trades, but even then it's important to look at the connection to the workforce. If my 15-year-old has been involved in a program at school that has been an exciting, given them an exciting viewpoint into career opportunities in construction, that's great. But what is next for them? What does that program do to keep them engaged and to keep them on an actual pathway to a job and an apprenticeship? So for me, the KPIs fall into three main ways to measure effectiveness of workforce development programs. Are they successful in job placement? Are they successful in retention in those jobs? And then from there, are they successful in moving participants on a career path through apprenticeship completion? You know, for employers, I would look for a program that has a proven track record in finding good applicants and where other employers are saying that it worked for them. And the retention number is really important. Again, if a program says, well, we've put 100 people into construction jobs over the past 6 months, if 98 of those 100 placements are no longer in those jobs, then that's a really important KPI to be looking at when you're an employer looking for a program that's going to help you find good candidates for your team. And if they're not measuring retention, that might be fair if that's out of scope, but it's also potentially a red flag. And I think it's also important to understand what's going on in the industry in general, in your own community or province, if you can, because numbers are really only valuable when we understand them in comparison to other numbers or to trends. So it's important to know what's normal in the industry. And for example, in construction, you know, I think it's fair to say, I think we would all agree that we have a culture challenge in our industry. And as far as we can measure, an average turnover or attrition rate for first-year workers is 50%. So if you're looking for a program as an employer and you're seeing that the turnover in year one of placements through that program is 45%, you need to know that that's actually better than average, and that's a good result. So understanding those numbers in the context of what else is happening is super important. And I think I would look also at repeat business. So if you're looking at a workforce development program where you can see that employers are going back and they're going back 2 and 3 and 4 times, or they've been working with a program over a period of years, that's also really a good measure of effectiveness and success for that program. And finally, I would say that if a program you're considering is publicly funded, be aware that they have an obligation to publish their results. And if you can't find them on the website, don't be shy about asking. You can ask, especially if it's a taxpayer-funded program. It's really important to understand how they're measuring their success and to make sure that you have access to that before you get involved.
Fantastic advice. And I mean, the timeliness of any program that brings new entrants into the workforce is certainly something that I know all employers would welcome. Tim, I'd like to ask you if you could speak to us about some of the programs that Chandos has partnered with that are working.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nicole. We, as a B Corp, we reach out to lesser represented groups, and that's part of our strategy and our value system. External partners that we're going to be focusing on this year is that focus. So I'm Indigenous myself, so we're going to be working on the Indigenous Professionals Association of Canada as an organization that has a number of good candidates. We also represent, as Lisa said, the women are very underrepresented in the construction industry, and we're going to be looking at forming a partnership with the Canadian Association of Women in Construction and firms like Mosaic. And I think for some of our hourly people, we're going to be focusing on other organizations like Ms. Wabik, which is based in Toronto, which is an organization that focuses on, among other things, trades, Indigenous trades. Women Building Futures is another one that we've worked with. Embers out of Vancouver has been on some of our projects as well, and Blade Runners. I know we have a relationship with the Alberta Indigenous Career Center. Momentum and Building Up, I think, are just a few other ones that we have good partnerships and had some good success with on a number of our projects.
Fantastic. That's a whole wealth of knowledge. I can't even get it all down fast enough.
Good thing it's recorded.
Yeah, certainly. I'd also like to ask Stephen if you could share your thoughts with us on programs that you've seen that have worked well or not worked so well.
Yeah, I must say what Lisa said was right on. We have to show metrics that it actually works. Getting people from the training into the system, and retention is always a problem. And construction is advertised as a high-paying job, a glamorous job, but it is hard work, and some people cannot handle it. You start working in the cold weather, you can't handle it, and people quit all the time, and you have to replace them. So it is a problem. So measuring is very important. Acca is working with TCBN. They have a mentorship program called Next Gen. And they're having problems getting mentors to come and help with the kids and get them in construction. So they have one mentor handling 5 or more kids. And they have a good program running. The metrics are better, and it can get better, but we need some help with that. And we are trying to help along with that. We have apprentices calling us looking to get placements. So before contractors, we're trying to place them. But again, you have to ask what kind of training they have, any experience. So we will definitely help apprentices to find training anywhere they want, or to get with a contractor that's worked with us. So that's what we see coming up, and we will work with, I think, on Building Up. We're talking to Building Up, working with them. And of course, I'm a retired union member, so we always look to the unions to make sure that they need any help or send people straight to the union to show them what is available to get involved in the trades.
Fabulous. Yeah. And it's important to keep that conversation going always, what's available. Now, I'd like to ask Karen Walsh. Karen, what are the most difficult challenges for employers or on job sites to address when it comes to inclusivity? What techniques have you recommended or tried with success, and which have not worked as well as you would have liked?
Thank you, Nicole. Well, to answer your first question, the most difficult challenge, I believe, is workplace culture and understanding workplace culture. A good diversity and inclusion strategy can help organizations attain and retain top talent. But I think we have to look at the differences of diversity and inclusion. And I know from working with the Office to Advance Women Apprentices for the past over 11 years, and working with all levels of government, industry, trades colleges, and contractors on a daily basis, that absolutely a lot of them do have the check mark for diversity. But when we dig deeper, inclusion is not a part of that. And then when they see their employees dropping off or their employees having struggles on site, it is the fact that it's not an inclusive site. So an inclusive workplace model will thrive with diversity, but a diverse workplace model without inclusion won't do a lot. And so I'm just going to give you an example. I spoke at an oil and gas conference a couple of weeks ago, and during a break, a few people came up to me, and one person said to me, I don't understand why women don't apply for jobs on the oil field, going offshore on the oil rigs and things like that. We never get any resumes. And I had already done my due diligence before the conference. And I know for a fact that women are applying for these positions. Number one, their resumes are not being reviewed. And number two, some of the women don't go into the expenses of doing the basic survival training courses that are very costly in order to apply for the oil rigs. And so I just asked one person, I said, so how many women do you have working in catering and housekeeping and that on the oil rigs? And he goes, oh, so many. I would say 75 or 80%. So I said, your problem is not that women won't go to work on the oil rigs. Your problem is that you have a stigma of the women that are going there and a picture of the jobs for the women, and not be more inclusive for the trained women that can possibly take on these positions and be very successful for them. So we at the Office to Advance Women Apprentices in Newfoundland and Labrador have been in operation for over 12 years. We have since replicated our model in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, for a total of 8 offices. And ours is a wraparound support. And to just point out a couple of the things Lisa was referring to, Lisa, you're absolutely right. Without the accountability and without showing the success. So our model is that we work with women before they even get into the trades and as they get their career started and work with them to help them decide which trades career is right for them in the construction field. Then we work with those women and the employers to help them get employed. And once they are looking for the job, we work with the contractors on a regular basis. So how is your organization going to be more inclusive? How are you set up for this? And we have contractors calling us on a regular basis. I've never had a woman work here before, and I have 38 guys on site. How do I address this? I have no washrooms on site. We're out in a remote area. So we work with the contractors prior to that. And then once women get hired, we continue to work with the contractor and the employer to ensure that they remain in the job. And if issues come up, we work with them as those issues come up to help retain as the result of that. And we have had very, very successful numbers as a result of it. But one of the things we always say, and I know one of the speakers here mentioned from about looking at diversity and inclusion from the top down. Well, our model has been from the top down, absolutely, but also from the bottom up. And the biggest gap is in the middle. And we have done some testing on that when we had a building of an oil rig here over the past few years. We had a percentage through our government under diversity and inclusion for the number of women to be on those projects. Those numbers were superseded by the fact that women were actually meeting each other around the corners and that. But after this project was over, we looked and done roundtables with those women to ask what worked on the site, what didn't work. And what they told us was at the top level, there was diversity officers and everything there for all these big companies. At the bottom level, there was the opportunity to talk about diversity and inclusion and orientation. But when they got on the job sites for the shop steward, the foreman, the supervisor, the general foreman, they had not been educated. They had absolutely no idea that their big companies had a diversity and inclusion plan. And what was happening, they were basically saying to the woman, go back to the end of the line and do your work or you won't be back for the next turnaround. So we investigated that a lot more. And then we reached out to the contractors and started sharing some of our finds to the contractors. And the contractors in turn have started to make some changes for themselves. And at that oil and gas event, there was a gentleman came up to me and he said, you're right on. We have it at the top. We have it at the bottom, but there's always been a missing gap. And we have never been able to figure out what that missing gap is. But it just clicked into me that the missing gap is the fact that our contractors and our subcontractors are not communicated to and they're not educated on what's happening in the field and how do we become more inclusive. So in doing some of those things, what we have learned is that some of the biggest impacts on females has been getting them comfortable in the job, have been getting them accepted on the job. And you had mentioned a video that we recently worked on throughout Atlantic Canada with all of our apprenticeship divisions. And what we done there is we talked to the women who are working on these sites and found out what your struggles were. And we developed a video as a result of that to show some of the struggles that women are facing. But it wasn't to push out and emphasize what the struggles were. It's really about how do we get our allies. We want men to be important allies in the effort of importing gender diversity. And this video, I think, depicts that and shows that we need to be more than a bystander on these construction sites, and that once people start to speak up, that's when we do see the cultural change. But until companies and organizations are educated that there is still a big problem with inclusivity, whether that be women, Indigenous, other minorities, it doesn't matter what it is, as long as we all are ignorant to the fact that in order to have a very strong work site, it has to be an inclusive work site, and everybody on that work site has to be educated or in 10, 15 years, we will be in the same position we are now, getting workers and losing workers because workers are not being retained because that comfort level is not on the site for them.
Yeah, that's, I think, super, super valid. And I see Lisa's got her hand up to weigh in. So Lisa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nicole. Karen, I agree with everything that you're saying. And it reminds me of a phrase that we use here with our program, the Builders Code, which is setting a baseline code of conduct standard for acceptable work sites across our industry in BC. And we always say it's about fixing the system, not the women. And I think that's really important. And what else I think is a challenge, or can be a challenge for employers when it comes to culture change, is we need to recognize that the whole workforce feels the stress and strain of bullying, hazing, and harassment. And this is not only happening to non-traditional groups. So to come in with a program spotlighting what might be perceived as special treatment for women or Indigenous workers or youth can be a tricky thing, because there are other workers who aren't in those groups who are also hurt and suffering, and it can feel unfair. So there's a risk that there may be backlash or even weaponization against these efforts. And that's why, as Karen is saying, it's so important to have everybody from crew to site supers and forepeople and executives on the same path and understanding what's going on and the reasons for it, that it isn't about special treatment. It's about everybody having a safe place to come to work, that it makes it a safer site, that bullying, hazing, and harassment cause distraction, which leads to stress, which leads to accidents and loss of productivity. There are so many reasons to not tolerate these behaviors on site. And I think that's a big challenge for employers to really recognize that until everybody on a site feels safe, no one is really going to feel safe. And it's complex.
Yeah, that's a really good observation, Lisa, for sure. Safety on sites for everyone. Tim, you would like to weigh in too, please?
Yeah, I'd just like to add, Karen, you hit on a word there that is I found is very important in recognizing, understanding different cultures as well, and that is education. And I think it's important. One of the roles I have is talking about cultural awareness and making sure that our allies, which are non-Indigenous, let's say, understand the Indigenous history and understand what a lot of the Indigenous people have gone through. And it's the same thing with women in construction as well. There's a lot of different circumstances that we have to understand. And Lisa, to your point, it's not, you're right. We should be changing the system. We should be changing the way we do things. And that's what the important part, and being more flexible. And those are some of the things we're trying to do with Indigenous communities, and especially recognizing that, there is a shortage right now of talent in the construction industry. And we also recognize that, Indigenous youth is the fastest growing demographic in Canada. So what do we do now should they adapt to our styles, or should we maybe adapt to their styles and understand what it's going to take to reach out to these communities and let them know the opportunities available so that they can, participate and enjoy in some of this prosperity and have kind of a meaningful contribution to the society as well. So a couple of key points there that I totally agree with, Karen. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I'd actually, I like that advice, and your role sounds like you might be able to answer this question. What would be the best advice that you would give an organization in increasing the diversity and inclusion in their organization?
Yeah, I think it's some of what I kind of said. It's a breaking down of the traditional way of doing things, and recognizing that within diversity and within a diverse culture, there's a lot of different backgrounds, different ways of doing things. And I think we need to be more open-minded and receptive to some of these ideas. And that's what, that's one of the things I valued about Chandos, is their innovativeness and their inclusivity and willing to listen. So it's, so I can use Indigenous for an example. We've always felt as an organization, and our president, Tim Coldwell, is a great example of this. He started off as a summer student, Indigenous person, never grew up in the community, but he was given a chance because he showed a strong work ethic. But we always felt that if you had the right attitude, you can always teach the skills. So these are some of the things that we rather focus on. So in a person, like using an Indigenous person, for example, that may come from a remote community or is not used to the culture of working in a large center, what can we do to make that adjustment more comfortable so that they can be more accepted and included in the way we do things? And a lot of that is education. A lot of that is maybe a peer mentor type system. And that's where the affinity groups come in. And I think, working to recognize that we all come from diverse backgrounds, we should be celebrating that and trying to capitalize that as opposed to criticizing it. And I think that's the whole concept of inclusivity, is that our diversity is our strength. So these are some of the things that we will always try to focus on. And it's you need to have an open mind and you need to be respectful, I think, of other people's culture. And if you can adopt those philosophies and those values, I think you're going to have a more accepting workplace and more welcoming workplace, which I think which most construction companies would want right now, given the fact that there's a bit of a shortage in the industry right now.
Yeah, excellent observation. Stephen, can we ask you to weigh in?
Certainly. In our organization, the policy of diversity and inclusion came up the last few years. We looked at ourselves in the office in civil. We are already diverse in the office. And why was that? We have, as Tim will say, people from Nigerian, Somalian, Iranian, different countries, even Ecuador. So it's quite a mixture. And we wonder about, were we actually looking for this? And the reason was not. We just hired people for their talent. And we had some guys who actually stuck with us in the field now. And we asked them, well, why some companies come and offer you more money? Why did you stick with us? And they said, because the way you treat people, we treat everyone the same. This person had to be from Montreal and through Haiti from Montreal. So you treat people the same. I said, well, is that different in other companies? And they said, you won't believe it. So we were lucky because I am being Black and my daughter runs the company with me. And we never looked at color. We hired a person for their talent, but we looked at everyone. And we didn't pick up who we're going to have an interview with. You had the right resume. Let's see what you're all about. And that worked for us. And the inclusivity is very easy when you go to people, as Tim was saying. Well, what's your culture? What kind of food you eat? Can you bring some in? And you learn that Toronto is so multicultural, and you got to enjoy that. And you bring that to the office, and you bring that to the work sites. We have some girls working on our sites, and they ask for, can we get access to Procore so we can look at drawings? Sure, here you are. I said, really? Well, some of the jobs you can't do that. No, you want to do something, use your phone. You want to look at drawings? Fine. You want to suggest something? Suggest something. Let's all work together. Let's have fun and go home having fun. It makes a big difference in the workplace, and everybody seems to be happy. We have meetings with the foreman and sub-foremen and come up with ideas, and everybody say what I have to say, and they feel better. And you can see in the results. The next week, everybody's happy and talking about more and more. When can we do it again? So the inclusivity, it has to be set up. And the diversity, you have to hire for that, but it's not that hard to do.
I love your story and I identify with it so much. We're going to meet one day and we're going to feel like we live in each other's lives. It's fantastic. And you're absolutely right on all points, Stephen. So thank you. Lisa, can I ask for your thoughts?
I just wanted to jump in and say, to Stephen's points and also to Tim's, I think the advice that I would give is to have a policy. And maybe that sounds dry and boring, but I do think you need to have a written document that's easy to understand, that's also transparent and visible to everybody on your team, and is something that you can refer back to if you need to. And from the research that we've done in BC, we think maybe 50 to 60% of construction employers here actually have DEI policies. And whether all of those employers who have them are actually aware of them or their staff is aware of them is a whole other question. So, at the Builders Code, we've got free policies online specifically created for construction employers in plain language. And I think that's been one of the most successful elements of that program is just then they've been downloaded thousands of times because you need that place to start to help communicate what expectations are and to refer back to for those times when you need to do that. It's a simple but important thing.
Absolutely. And you had me at free policies online.
Yes. Go get them. Go get them.
Let's get on those. And I'll ask Karen if you want to weigh in on the topic as well.
I think Lisa is 100% correct, is that it has to be all inclusive. And when we look at inclusivity, what are we really looking at? Like what as organizations and as contractors are we asking ourselves? And one of the biggest things we find, and we find the governments are pushing it a lot more, is a community benefits plan and benefits and diversity agreements and women's employment plans. And while they are absolutely great, it gets the contractors thinking and panicking, how do I do this? Where do I go? Where do I reach out to help make this happen? And they do make it happen. They put those in place, but there's no follow through and there's no accountability. So all the government organizations that are saying, we want you to have a women's employment plan. We want you to have a community benefits plan. So then my question has always been to them, where is the follow through? You're getting your check marks for the hiring, but how do you know these plans are successful? And I know for sure many times they haven't been successful. When I get a tradeswoman calling me to say there was 11 electricians laid off and 10 of them were women, 4 of us being Red Seal, and the only male was a first-year apprentice who's been there 4 months. There's a problem. So our back to that then has been to go back to our government and other officials talking about these inclusion plans for their accountability. So where's the accountability and who's tracking these numbers and who's ensuring that it's happening? Because some organizations absolutely thrive and want to be inclusive organizations and they see the benefits of that, but some of them are doing them to get the bids and get the contracts. And once they think the lens of the government is not on them anymore, or whatever group that's put that lens on them, then they're back to the old pattern again of 7% of males in the construction industry, and you look around the site and see it. So even though we're doing lots, there's still a lot more to be done.
Yeah, I have to agree. I'm actually interested to hear, Stephen, would you be able to share with us why you started the ACCA?
The short version of it. They started out with a group of people, and I mentioned TCBN because they were instrumental in this. There was some meeting in Ottawa, and one of the contractors, the general contractors, was saying that they cannot find Black contractors to bid for their work. And a group came out of Toronto and started looking for Black contractors and could not find them. There was no organization that you can say, here we have a list of Black contractors, or we know of Black contractors. There's some in the US, some other countries, but not in Toronto, not in Canada. And we were beating around, should we start an organization, should we not? Then COVID hit last year and we all scattered. Then one of our members said, let's try to start this again. And then the nooses appeared. And that's when they got serious. Listen, we have to get this started. And I think 6 of us got together. At that time, you could visit restaurants. We got together in this restaurant and decided, okay, let's go for it. We had a plan. And we went live in September last year. Our whole goal is to get more Black contractors visible and get them into the construction industry. There are a lot of Black contractors who are being stigmatized already, who've been turned down, who've had all kinds of problems and being accepted. And our mandate now is to get them into the system through education, showing them how to bid properly, how to bid better, and get even journeymen or tradespeople into starting their own business. And there's quite a few willing to start, but too scared or got thrown back before. And the small subcontractors get them into the general contractor so they take on better jobs and showing them how to do things properly so they can grow their business into the system. And let's grow our numbers. And right now is a needed venue to get more Black contractors or more contractors, period. So we think that we are looking to increase. We have about 100 people on our list, 120 people on our list, half of them are members. So we are growing and we're doing some exciting things. But the reason for it, because of someone in Ottawa said they cannot find Black contractors.
Well, that's a good reason. Yeah, and I love the story of the mentorship in there, because I think that's key. The new entrants, they need somebody to guide them through the ropes. contracting and construction is not something you decide tomorrow you're starting. There's a lot of barriers. So that's excellent. Thanks for sharing that with us. Like to now pose a really big picture question to you all. And I think we're going to start with Tim. So you're all going to get the same question, so you all have time to prepare. Complete this sentence. In 10 years, construction's workforce will be...
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to go off a little bit here, but it's interesting that this question came up because it kind of tied into this presentation I was sharing with you earlier. And in 10 years, 46% of the construction industry is going to retire. So the construction industry has 1.5 million people. That's a lot of people in the next 10 years that are going to retire. And I think what you have to do is that if you don't have a diversity and inclusion policy right now, and you're insistent on trying the old ways of hiring people that look like you or people that are similar to you, you're going to get left behind. And with Canada growing as a country and growing through immigration, we're going to be working with a lot of diverse cultures moving forward. And I think what we have to do is we have to make sure that we take the time to be acceptable to these newcomers to Canada. And we also have to understand and learn about their cultures and learn about the strength they bring in their diversity. So it's something that's very crucial, I think, to all the companies. I know in our corporation, we have a turnover issue, and I think it's pretty much within the industry. And a lot of times what happens is our hiring managers may be looking at other companies to try to steal talent. So they're always looking for the competitors to see if we can take their best talent. And I'm sure that's going on all over the place. So we're going to have to look at different organizations. So I came from the financial service industry. We have one of our VPs who came from the teaching industry. And this is where you have to think a little bit outside the box on how you're going to grow your business and also grow it in a diverse way. There was a quote I heard once, and I like this quote, and I think it kind of fits well with where we're going. And I forget who said it, but we talk about the different cultures and different races. Really, at the end of the day, there's only one race. It's the human race. And I think what we have to do as a country, be more accepting and willing to work with each other and understand each other. And I think the companies that can pick that up quicker and adopt these inclusive policies will be the ones that will be more successful.
Yeah, I have to agree. That's a great observation. Karen, can I ask you to complete the sentence? In 10 years, construction's workforce will be?
10 years, the construction's workforce will be diverse because of the shortage that we're all seeing right now. There's no other way for it but to be diverse. But the difference, I think, will be that those who are truly progressing towards inclusion will have the most success. And we have to have the buy-in and for the contractors to be engaged and want this change. And that'll happen when they look from the top down, bottom up, and from the middle, all throughout your organization, and see, what changes have to be made. But I don't even think the word change is the correct word. I think more open, more inclusive, be more adaptable. And then and only then will we see the real change that I think all companies are now looking for. And look outside the color, look outside the race, look outside the gender, and ask yourself as a contractor, what talent does this person have to bring to my company? And as a result of that talent to bring into my company, how is my company going to thrive? How is my company going to be better? How is my company going to get more bids? Because we hear it from the contractors all the time. I had absolutely no idea my equipment would spend less time in the shop because it was being operated by a woman. Or to have a customer call and say, thank you for leaving my home and your construction site in such top shape. And contractors said, that's never happened before because women are bringing that lens to it. So once they start to see what the diverse groups are bringing to the job site, I think that's when the big change is going to happen.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. It's definitely an observation we've made personally. Some of our favorite operators are women because they take excellent care of the equipment and the site. Yeah, I agree with you. Stephen, could I ask you to complete the sentence? In 10 years, construction's workforce will be?
Quite different, not only in color and gender and everything else, but I think the points of words from Tim and Karen, I think companies will be forced to change their ways. If you advertise, and we advertise quite a bit for technical staff, a lot of answers are newcomers to Canada right now. And in 10 years, that's going to get more and more. I mean, the population of Canada, as Tim said, is coming from the outside. So inevitably, you will see more and more newcomers into construction. You're seeing it right now in the offices. It's going to be into the trades also. So definitely, there's going to be quite a different change of who you see on the sites. The office is going to happen first, and then the sites will follow, definitely.
Yeah, and I agree. We're already seeing that, right? So, yeah. Lisa, can I ask you to complete the sentence? In 10 years, construction's workforce will be?
Well, definitely much younger, as Tim said. And, I have an 18-year-old and a 21-year-old, and I'm always struck by how much more emotionally and culturally intelligent our young people are. I grew up in the 80s. That's the golden age of bullying. These kids, they have a much different way of looking at life and work. And I think that youth will also help shape what I always call the concept of employer of choice. And I think many of you have mentioned that or something similar today. The internet gives us transparency, and the skills shortage gives us competition. And top talent, especially youth, will benefit from those forces because they make it more possible than ever to look for those top employers who have a reputation for putting their workforce first, who don't tolerate negative behaviors. And as Karen mentioned, diversification is becoming a competitive advantage already. We see employers taking really bold public steps in this direction already now, and it's working for them. So, others will be left behind in the hunt for talent and for project opportunities, and that will force change in the industry.
Yeah, and I think that necessary change. Karen, you'd like to weigh in with some final comments?
Well, I'd just like to say that what we challenge our contractors to do when they come to us and say, well, I'd like to hire a woman bot, or I'd like to be more inclusive bot, we encourage them to connect with contractors that already are, and that are already seeing the changes and seeing the successes. And some of them have done that. And we also put off networking breakfasts and things like that to bring all the contractors together so that those successful contractors can share and talk about the successes and things that they've had. And that in turn has made more contractors step back and look and reach out to those other contractors or reach out to support organizations to ask for the support in doing so, because I think they are seeing that the change is coming, the shortage are coming. But once it's like everything. If you work and communicate with the people that you feel are on par with you, other contractors, and you see that it is working for them, then the opportunities are there to see. So I encourage all contractors that are on here today to reach out to your peers and ask, have you tried it? What's working? And how can you get on board?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's learn from one another's successes, right? So that would definitely be something. Well, that brings us to the end of our session today. So I would like to thank everyone for attending. I would like to remind you all that CCA has created diversity and inclusion resource pages on its website, which includes education resources, toolbox talks, books, and video recommendations, and other initiatives. So please take a look and consider sending in your resources that you're willing to share. I know we've heard about a lot today, and I'm sure they're going to make their way onto the CCA page where we can all take advantage and share in the success that others have found. So that does conclude our time. Thank you again. And thank you to our panelists for sharing your expertise here today. Some great information, great stories. And I think we could probably have multiple sessions following this because there's just so much good dialogue to be had. So thank you all very much. And please join us as we continue to virtually celebrate Construction Day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.